would you mind telling Oni and the audience what your name, degree, year, campaign colour and brand is for the campaign?
My name is Grace Street. I use she, her pronouns. My degree currently is a Bachelor of Arts Honours, because I've now finished a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and Political Economy and a Diploma of Languages in French and a bit of Arabic, which leaves me in my 5th year now, but it's justified, don't worry. I'm running technically with the Grassroots campaign, but we have a joint brand of Free Palestine, which respectively are a Kelly and a Forest Green.
How are you feeling going into the campaign so far?
Feeling excited, a little bit nervous naturally. Like, it's a pretty high profile thing, and the SRC presidency is no small thing. It's no joke. And at the same time, it's very much an honour to be running for it and to have the support of a lot of people for it who have obviously got trust in me and like the work I've done in the SRC over the last 2 years. So overall, feeling good.
Okay, nice. What motivated you to run for president?
I think at the moment we are facing a number of crises in higher education, cost of living, housing. It's really important now more than ever, and going into next year, especially where staff will be entering another period of enterprise bargaining, that we have strong, fierce and experienced leadership in the SRC. The president is the person who's in a lot of, or in most of the meetings to do with academic board and a lot of other committees related to these policy decisions in the university, but most importantly, they're the face of the SRC, which I believe should be returned to a fighting student union that brings different groups together to work on the campaigns that we have going through our collectives. And there's not many other groups on campus that actually value the work of the collectives in terms of Women's Collective, Disabilities Collective, Queer Collective, Autonomous Collective Against Racism. So I believe I am someone that has done the work to show that I do that and that I believe in them. I have a genuine care for students' wellbeing in our broader community. And I have the experience to do so with my role in Education Officer last year and the General Secretary this year, which is something we desperately need at the moment because the president, as I said, is no small thing, it's a big job.
In terms of your policy commitments, what would you say the 3 most important are?
3 most important, okay. So I think obviously the most pressing, while there's a genocide unfolding right now, is divestment and cutting ties, which has been a campaign that we've been running for years, but obviously amping it up in the last 22 months as there has been a genocide in Gaza. So continuing the demands and the work that we did with the encampment last year to cut the 3 remaining ties with Israeli universities as part of the academic boycott, and as well all the other ways that the university materially and also ideologically supports the state of Israel through its partnerships, its research and its investments into Israeli companies, weapons companies and more. The second one is broadly what I would say is equity, which encompasses a few things. Like, a big change that the university is going through at the moment is the opening and the expansion of the Westmead campus, where there is confirmation now that there will be some subjects from the Conservatorium of Music taught there next year. So now it's more important than ever to have a strong link between all of our campuses and not just limit the SRC's presence and effects to the main Camperdown campus. And that extends to things generally under the equity banner as well, to do with expanding food hub, maybe looking into more of expanding a food hamper system like the one that they have at the Gadigal Centre, and equity in terms of, importantly, concession pickle cards as well, which is another big topic this year as we are sending another petition to Parliament. And I think it really is the year that we need to put an end to something that's just kind of blatant racism and also discrimination for long class and disability lines for people, and just makes everyone feel much more divided and like these students aren't welcome in higher education or in this country. And the third policy thing is related to cost of living and the housing crisis, which I guess I would like to have as its own thing, because that is probably the main issue that students are facing right now. The cost of living in broader society, but also on campus. Like the introduction from the university of $5 meals at Laneway Cafe is something that's welcome, but it's definitely not an endpoint. We need to go a lot further than that. And I think the important campaign that the International Student Collective with Super is running at the moment is to reopen International House, which touches on a few issues there, that there's 200 rooms that are in pretty good condition, just need a bit of a touch up in that building that could provide community, housing, and actually a dignified space to live in. At the same time, obviously, we saw over the weekend the racist marches across the country that are blaming migrants for the housing crisis. And so it's not more just putting a roof over people's heads, but it's also dignity, combating that racism and the inequality that's felt across the continent.
Okay, nice. So you talk about in your second policy expanding Food Hub. What exactly does that look like in practice, especially given that a lot of USU candidates have also pledged to expand things like the hours of Food Hub or the variety, for example?
Yeah, so I think one thing I know that the current Vice President and last semester's Vice President have been looking into is getting more donors for Food Hub, because unfortunately the university and USU aren't really putting enough money into it to sustain it. I believe there's only one paid person from the USU who runs it, and then the rest relies on the V team, the volunteers. So that's one thing that we can immediately look to is expanding the people that are actually running it with paid positions, because I think from that will flow more opening hours, more accessibility to students, and more things on offer. They have a decent sized space up in the Wentworth building, but as I was mentioning with our satellite campuses, I think that is somewhere we should expand Food Hub as well. Obviously people will be travelling between campuses, but that will depend on timetables, and some people spend most of their time at the Westmead campus or the Conservatorium of Music, and it just doesn't make sense that they don't have Food Hub options over there. So I think my two main priorities would be the locations and also the staffing from which would flow, hopefully, an expansion of products and availability.
Yeah, cool. And so when you talk about a stronger link between campuses, not just focusing on the campus, obviously part of that includes your idea to expand Food Hub. Are there any other things that you would like to implement that would strengthen the bond between campuses?
Yeah, I think they're obviously very different and unique. The Westmead campus is relatively new, very much new compared to the Conservatorium of Music, for example. So at the con, there is a really strong presence from the Con Student Association, the CSA. So for them, it would look like I would like to have a formal partnership with the CSA. And we actually do have an inter-campus committee and inter-campus officers within the SRC, but they're kind of a bit redundant at the moment. So we have the scope there to strengthen that partnership and actually have people that are advocating going between those campuses. At Westmead, I know there's already a few student associations there based on the dental and medical degrees that they do out there. So I imagine it would look like going to them first to do some consultation, probably have regular meetings about the needs and challenges or things that are going well at their campus, and then maybe looking if we're building a separate committee there based on the needs and the population, because as I said, the con will have courses there next year as well. So it won't just be people from that medical dental side of things.
Yeah. You say that the intercampus committee and the OBs are a bit redundant. How would things like a formal partnership, or I guess removing those to make way for other mechanisms, actually improve this?
So the CSA has, I guess, taken the route of wanting to, I guess, pursue themselves as their own association rather than working through the SRC, and they established that they would like to have the CSA alongside the SRC. So based on that framework that they've already got going and those wishes, that's where I see it more useful to just formalise a relationship rather than trying to, I guess, force them into the SRC and the different committees we have. So there already is some overlap, like in the past and this year we've had inter-campus officers who are part of the CSA as well, and so that's been good. But otherwise, they do work, I guess, through the SRC regardless, but most of their work related to the con is through the CSA, as far as I'm aware. And rather than doubling up, I think it would be just to formalize that relationship, as I said. They can still do things through the CSA, but maybe we're doing things like fortnightly meetings with the CSA. Doing a joint SAP application is something that they've floated before that I think is a really good idea. So they can still have their autonomy and their separation, but there is a higher degree of relationship and connection between the SRC and CSA.
Right, nice, thank you. One last question from this section. You talk about the racist neo-Nazi marches that happened this weekend and combating racism. What are things that you would put in practice or recommendations that you would make if you were to be president that would actually combat this other than activism and rallies?
Yeah, I think one thing to say is that having a strong presence on campus in activism and rallies that shows that we are progressive and anti-racist is really important. But I think that we need to do before that, and what we have for a lot of students of colour have voiced in the last few days, is that they want more measures in place to feel safe or have the tools to feel comfortable to go to these actions in the first place, which I think is a really important first place to start, because you can't just blindly ask people to come along and put aside their fear or safety for some bigger project. So I imagine I already had the kind of idea that we should have more sessions with the legal observers or our legal service throughout the year for office bearers, and that's one side of things. But then also formalising maybe some arrangements that we have between the white people and the SRC who are able to kind of, I suppose, be more on the front line if it comes to that. If there's a situation where students of colour are more at risk, and also extends to people that are generally targeted by the far right, which would also be visibly queer students as well. And I think acknowledging the privilege that, for example, I have as myself as a white person in these spaces is really important. And then this is where I guess collectives like the Autonomous Collective Against Racism come in and are really important in building up community and safe spaces for students on campus. And obviously there's the ethnocultural space in Manning House, which unfortunately not that many students are aware of. And during last year, when there was a lot of unsafety felt for women and people of colour on campus, there were some ideas that were floated around having more of access to campus security. People felt unsafe walking around at night, increasing the lighting on campus. Those are a few more basic solutions that can just increase people's actual and perceived safety. But yeah, there's a few levels to it. I think it's those logistical changes, it's community building, info provision and resources for people related to protests and their rights, particularly as international students. They are often faced with the myth that they might lose their visa over certain things, which is sometimes not true. But that fear mongering obviously works, and it's something that you wouldn't want to risk, to be deported or lose access to education. And those are the things that I think I would take the first steps with, but then also deferring to and supporting the campaigns of the Autonomous Collective Against Racism and other spaces on campus in how they want to lead the fight against racism against themselves that's been targeted towards people like them.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Grace. We'll move on to politics now, and we'll try and keep this brief if we can. Are you a member of a political party or political organisation?
Yes, I am a recent member of the New South Wales Socialist Party. I haven't been to any events or caucuses yet, it's quite new, but I am excited to get more involved in the future, as it is meant to be a more grassroots, people-powered party that isn't, I guess, held captive by the broader federal party and career politics.
Describe your own politics briefly.
So I think my politics are generally encapsulated by being in the group Grassroots, and then also Grassroots with a lowercase g, organising principles in terms of being people-powered, bottom-up organising, and also horizontal or democratic organising, which focuses around being anti-capitalist, feminist, pro-queer, anti-racist, and decolonial. looking across various forms and axes of oppression and being intersectional and centering the lived experiences and voices of those who are impacted the most.
Sounds good. Would you like to define left wing for us, given that there are other political groups in the SRC that would define themselves as left wing or grassroots or anti-capitalist? Almost every single president in the past few years has defined themselves like this. Could you give us your specific take again?
Of left wing generally, or my version of left wing?
Your version.
Okay, so yeah, that would be socialist, which encompasses many groups on campus. But that broadly left wing socialist view that is people powered, as I said, and probably focuses a lot more on autonomous and collective community organising than maybe what other people would see as left wing, in terms of more of a rigid structure of top-down organising and some more dogmatic theoretical backgrounds.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We'll move on to talking about the SRC now, and again, try to keep it quick. Firstly, can you define the primary roles of the SRC?
So I guess it's kind of encapsulated by what was in our old logo, which is the advocacy, representation, activism. So first and foremost, the SRC is there to represent undergraduate students. That's why we have one counsellor per 1,000 students elected each year. But we are an explicitly activist body, depending, I guess, under which presidency you have, that is meant to advocate for the rights of students at different levels, whether that be in the meetings that the SRC executive are present in, like academic board, or through our collectives, which are a really important and unique part of our student union. But we have a lot of student organising that's led by relevant groups and autonomously in some cases, as I mentioned.
Okay, cool. What would you say is a particularly successful campaign the SRC has run over the past few years, or conversely, something that you could see the SRC doing better?
I think one thing that is really important and has impacted a lot of students' everyday lives is 5-day simple extensions, and that will, to the second part of the question, continue as they're continuously under attack. 5-day simple extensions were suggested and brought in the SRC a couple of years ago in response to COVID measures and also the failure of the special considerations system at the time. So they're inherently linked. And I think there is still a very long way to go with fixing the special consideration system and or protecting 5-day simple extensions. I think the university keeps trying to push forward the idea that we should go back to 2 or 3-day simple extensions, but we know that students really value the 5-day simple extensions. And we know that because of the work that was put in by previous SRC presidents and executives that went to these meetings and organised with other academic board representatives from different faculties and backgrounds. They did lots of surveys to get student feedback and get that primary sources, I suppose, of how and why simple extensions matter to students, which showed things across class, race and disability lines. And then continuing that from there, we're looking to the Disabilities Collective collect some of our own more specific data about special considerations and 5-day simple extensions specifically related to disabled students and carers. So that's something that the SRC, I suppose, meets all of its functions in, that it's representing those students at the higher levels by collecting feedback and passing it on. We're advocating for students in that same way, and also being activists. There's not been any rallies that I'm aware of in terms of 5-day simple extensions, but the staff strikes and other things related to the student centre and cuts there are obviously inherently linked to the services that students receive and things like the special consideration system.
Okay, awesome. So, what relationships have you cultivated in your time at university that you can bring into your role as president?
Ooh, a lot. I think, personally, I started off in more of a club and society sphere. I was the president of the French Society a few years ago, and that's given me insight into how these clubs and societies run. So, for example, we did an event with the Social Work Student Society 2 weeks ago. I think that side of things, looking at faculty or clubs and societies with that more academic link is really useful. And then just through the different work that I've done over the last few years, I've met people from the CSA where it came from those ideas of like a joint SAP application, for example, people from the Muslim Students Association through our encampment last year and other campaigns that we've been running, people in the USU as well, which I would like to see do more work in collaboration with the SRC, which I know that some of the new board members pledged to do. So I'm looking forward to that. What other areas of campus do we have? A lot of staff links. I am a member of the NTU as well as a paid office bearer. So I've met staff through my studies and also through the NTU, which we have been working on joint projects together with related to Palestine, also free speech on campus. What other areas of campus do we have? It's just the general student body. Our collectives bring in people of all different backgrounds, ages, some postgrad, some undergraduate, some mature age, some fresh out of high school. So I think across the broad spectrum, pretty much all groups on campus.
Okay, wonderful. So you mentioned collaboration with other student organisations on campus, such as the USU, Supra, and the CSA. How do you seek to reconcile the different goals of each organisation?
Yeah, I mean, at times it's good that we have different goals, like the USU can focus on clubs and societies, campus culture and food and beverage on campus. Obviously, we know that the cost of living and the cost of studying, I suppose, on campus is inherently linked to those things, which is where we do have to work together on issues. And then the Supra is, as the equivalent of the SRC for postgraduate students, is a bit more clear cut in how we work together and advocate for the same issues. But yeah, the USU is a bit different, and I know there's been some competition between us at different times. I think also recently over the $5 meal deals, there was a bit of competition, I believe, about who started it up or who can take the credit for it. But overall, I think at the end of the day, we can take that as a joint effort, which is a good example of what can be done and what needs to be done at a much bigger scale. I can't believe it's taken this long for the USU, SRC, Super and Uni to come together to actually do something like subsidised meals on campus. Similar with the CSA, as I said, they like their degree of autonomy that can be run by music students to represent their interests. So formalising that relationship and looking at things like there's been an idea for years of having a shuttle between the con and UCID, which I think is even more relevant now that people will be going presumably between the con, the Camperdown campus and now the Westmead campus. And getting to our question again as well of if students feel safe around Sydney or on campus more generally. I think the shuttles are an issue of accessibility, not only for students but also for staff who are presumably going between these campuses as well. So I think that is a place where it's not the CSA or the SRC's purview to try and get these shuttles going, but it's something that we can work together on and should be working together on to force the university to be doing with their bus services, which the main ones which don't actually run during the day. So that's an example of where I think we should push for those buses to be used as at least a pilot shuttle kind of program. And maybe the USU would be involved there as well, I suppose, since the CSA is under them technically.
The SRC presidency is a tremendous commitment. How will you manage the time?
I've been doing that in the SRC the last year and a half pretty successfully, but obviously the president role is a bigger one than the ones I've been doing currently. I do have a plan in terms of my honours, which is also a big commitment. I've started that this semester and I have now got approval from the faculty to do that over 3 semesters, part-time more or less. So that's already sorted, all good. And having already finished 2 degrees, I'm pretty confident that I can do my honours and SRC presidency at the same time. I do live quite far from campus, but I've made that work so far. So I think the time commitment isn't so much of an issue. It's just about prioritisation, and I think the extra stipend increase would help with that.
Nice. Alright. How have you collaborated with other factions, and how would you collaborate with them on council, especially given the enlarged size of council next year? Specifically, how would you handle factional conflicts and disagreements about the strategy and direction of the SRC?
Yes. Well, for one, I think that disagreement and debate are healthy to an extent, of course, about the different ways that the SRC should be responding to or orienting itself towards different issues and problems. But often our council meetings do devolve into something that's beyond healthy debate, which I am very aware of and probably guilty of at times as well. I think next year will also be a bit unique. We see a few more kind of independent tickets that are running this year, like the engineering or the science one or the queer agenda, which I think will be an important consideration as well, where it's not just maybe the same three factions fighting amongst themselves, but it's a broader coalition of students that will have their own ideas and people to advocate for, like in the case of, again, engineering, science or queer agenda tickets. So balancing all those is important, and I think that extends beyond council into maybe like more regular meetings, or just providing opportunities for consultation, discussion outside of council, so that when you do get to council, it's not a whole room of 50 people yelling at each other, but it is a bit more just constructive. But as I said, healthy debate is good to an extent, which I think I can manage quite well. And I have been doing over the last few years. I'm asked about collaboration with other factions. Last year I had a co-officer from Socialist Alternative, and I worked with them closely and Solidarity and some of the Labour students throughout the encampment, which went very well. And then Unauthorised Stores Day that I ran last year, which I think is a great example of that collaboration, where we ran some education action group meetings, which brought together groups that typically don't get along very well. This year, I've had a co-officer from PENTA, the International Student Faction, where we've been working very closely and on our different priorities. Obviously, Anna as an international student advocate, and I've also been working with a array of different groups on the executive, which so far, so good.
The SRC president sits on several committees. How will you approach engaging with these committees and management in general, particularly given the opposition Grassroots has had in the past with regards to attending these meetings? Has this changed?
Well, I think the idea, there was definitely an idea put out in last year's election that Grassroots doesn't attend meetings or whatnot. The meetings that we are firmly against are like one-on-one meetings with the Vice Chancellor or other higher-ups behind closed doors, where the only kind of outcome is that maybe the president feels a bit important that they got to sit down with these people, and then the higher-ups from the university get to say that they consulted students, but nothing really comes of it. There's obviously a power imbalance in the room. Like the Vice Chancellor is someone who's on a $1.3 million salary versus one student representative. So that's why we see it as futile, but also counterproductive to the orientation of the SRC as something that is against management's wishes, particularly at the moment as they become increasingly corporatized and against the functions of the SRC. So in terms of all of those other committee meetings, like we see and I see academic board, academic quality committee, the academic standards and policy committee as all really important ones that do need student representation. And those ones are also good because they do have more students than just a president. So when you do have a stronger student presence, and like I mentioned earlier about simple extensions and academic board, where previous presidents had kind of united the students that are representing their respective faculties on there, that's where you can make an impact, which I believe is basically the foundation of our argument, that you can't get things done on your own in a room behind closed doors. And at the very least, going to these meetings gives us valuable information about what the university is planning to do. Like that's where we got the tip off for that multiple times now, that they were planning to make changes to 5-day simple extensions. So there is some value, at least in the more informative ones. But yeah, there's a difference, I believe, between the day-to-day committee meetings where we're advocating for students and putting things forward, and the more closed-door meetings with management on a one-on-one basis that don't achieve anything.
Okay. Yep. Last year, Grassroots lost the presidency after several uninterrupted years. What do you attribute that to, and what kind of reflection did that give rise to for yourself and also for your faction?
Yeah, I think the rhetoric last year was that we need to change, and I think that responded to the different crises that students were facing at that moment that maybe they attributed to the SRC in terms of cost of living, housing, academic crises. Change is good. I think that's given us time to realise that we don't necessarily need the presidency to get things done. I've initiated a number of projects this year just as the General Secretary. I think we're going into it this year on much more of a level of coming to it why we shouldn't just continue a grassroots presidency, for example, but why this specific person should be the president with these specific policies, and not so much taking it for granted, which I don't think was so much the case last year, but it also was a much more polarized campus at the time after the encampment and with the new campus access policy.
Okay, yeah, cool. You've listed a really broad range of campaigns. As much as people loathe to admit it, there is a limited SRC budget. How would you manage that, and what decisions would you make?
Absolutely, I'm very aware of that as a General Secretary and someone who's handling those budgets this year. And I think the university's indicated that we're not going to be getting much more money next year, so that's definitely a relevant question. But we can be a bit nifty with it as well. Like, we have our collective budgets, but I've also been finding ways this year to help people out with their projects through things like contestable budgets for student weeks and office bearer projects. When you have someone with experience and who knows what they're doing, you can actually make that happen. Obviously, apart from the money, there's the time constraint of things, which is where our collectives come in, and building up the people power there so that we can maintain and start campaigns is the really big thing, which I believe. The president is busy with a lot of the admin and bureaucratic side of things, and I see their role as more of a facilitator of these campaigns. So if it's working out the money side of things in ways that people can get the money that they need for their campaigns, as well as the resources that are non-monetary, that's where I would be putting my energy.
Okay. You've copped some flack this year being labelled as dirge when it comes to deciding budgets as General Secretary. One of the budgetary decisions you've made that you've mentioned is your is to promote the use of shared contestable budgets. Have office bearers been receptive to that, and how would you approach this next year?
Yeah, I think it's funny every year that people really want to increase in their budget and they've got all these ideas, but office bearers often don't actually end up using all of their budgets, which is one thing. So as much as I've put forward that people could apply for funding from these special pools of funding, they actually haven't really been used yet because people still are yet to get through their collective budgets. So I've been making that clear when I've been trying to do my monthly budget updates, and I think people are aware, and I've suggested that for a few things like software we used for the referendum last week, for example, which people were receptive to that idea rather than taking it from, say, the education budget. But yeah, the politics around budgets are a big thing, but I wanted to emphasise, and I think that came across in the end, I haven't been called doge since, that it wasn't so much our idea. We had a limited amount of money from the university that could be spread amongst collectives, and obviously this year we also have a renewed and very strong international student collective. So there were just more groups to spread around the money. But as I said, there was actually more money on the whole that you could get from the other pools.
Continuing on the topic of the broad list of campaigns the SRC would run, how would you respond to criticisms, regardless of whether or not they're founded criticisms? Many of the SRC's campaigns relate to federal and state politics and to Palestine rather than university issues.
Yeah, well, at one level, like for individual students, most are really upset with the idea or the knowledge that their student fees are going towards genocide, to speak specifically about Palestine, but also about the university's other investments and ties to things that are contributing to the climate crisis or other crises around the world. And also the SRC has historically and continues to have a big role to play in the broader political landscape on this continent. We know that there's a number of past SRC presidents who have gone into federal politics or different levels of politics generally at that. And also, I think specifically at the University of Sydney, like our Vice Chancellor, Mark Scott, who we direct a lot of our campaigns at, he's also the chairperson of the Group of 8 universities. So there is a big national component there that the SRC is directly related to. And a lot of the issues that students are facing in relation to placement poverty or cost of living can only be solved by these state or federal government policy, as much as we can maybe do a few band-aid kind of solutions in the meantime related to food hub and things. We have to get to the source of the problem. So without doing that, we're not actually trying to solve these problems for students.
Okay, wonderful. One of the campaigns you've written about in your statement is the Transport Concession campaign, where you say you would work towards cross-campus campaigns, forcing the government's hand, not just continuous petitions. Talk us through what you think is the weakness of the current campaign so far.
Yes, well, next year will be 20 years, basically, since the campaign has been run. And it's had more of an uptick in the last year or two. But we had a petition that got 20,000 signatures last year, and it didn't get anywhere. And some people attributed this to that it was being put forward by the Greens MP, Jenny Leong, and people not wanting to work with the Greens. So they're trying it again this year with an independent mover this time, which I don't think will necessarily solve anything, but at least there is a new petition and some new momentum there. But a big problem with the overall card concession campaign is that the main stakeholder that people believe, or numerically, is international students who don't vote. So there's less incentive for the government to give them transport concessions. That's where I believe that we need more domestic students on board as people who do vote and have more of, I guess, a ability to get a response from the government. And the cross-campus part that I mentioned and you brought up is that a lot of this campaign has been very localised to the University of Sydney, which of course is a very active campus and where these things should be started up and supported. But I think without getting it to the rest of New South Wales, where this issue wholly affects, it will probably just seem like another small campaign that USyd is running that the government can wave away because they're not taking it seriously, basically.
Yeah, one more question here. What is your relationship with the NTU, and what will your approach be during Enterprise Marketing next year?
Yeah, so I'm a member of the NTU, but as a student, I'm not super involved, but I like to keep up to date with their campaigns and going to meetings. I know a lot of people through organising last year around Palestine and for free speech, which is an issue that equally impacts students and staff across the different political groups and branches of the NTEU, of which there's kind of three main ones. So generally, I have a good and working relationship with people across the spectrum in the NTU, and going into next year, it will be a very collaborative one, depending on what their orientation is and who their president next year is. That will maybe look different in terms of the politics that they're putting forward. But generally, it will be supporting staff. It is their EA that we're talking about, after all, and their strikes. But we know that staff working conditions are student learning conditions. So we do have a stake in whatever action and things that they're taking.
As a sort of a follow-up to this is, what do you see as something the SRC can do materially on the ground? And I do know that, back when it was still being negotiated, when the strikes were happening through the early 2020s, there's a huge role, but because I would say that in the past, this year and last year, because there hasn't been bargaining and things have settled down, I would say that as unfortunate as it is, people sort of have these very short memories when it comes to material things that they can do. So how would you address it in a potential presidency?
Yeah, so I think the basic things that, as I mentioned, haven't happened for a few years now are simple things like student contingents, which might be from the SRC, but I know that ones that have been successful in the past are when you get different faculties or disciplines to have student contingents, like philosophy students, support staff, or philosophy students on strike, for example, because the strikes are only effective insofar as people actually go on strikes, or people don't go to class, or they encourage their teachers to join the NTU in their strike action. So that's one role I see students in playing in building up the strikes, and then also being on the picket on the day. But there was only 9 days of strike action, over 2022, 2023. So there's more that we need to be doing year round as well, in terms of educating students and the broader community about the importance of strike action, if they choose to take it, or the bargaining more generally. Because I think there is a myth around that, strikes are too disruptive and it's not proportionate to the issues that staff are facing. But if you look at the numbers and the casualisation, and the last EA, they didn't even get a real wage rise. There is a lot of things that we should be going harder about and educating the general population, and then trying to get them on board with visible support from students, I think is the biggest role that the SRC can play, if not more.
How would you endeavour to make the SRC more visible? And on a related note, you mentioned getting a genuine presence at university welcome events. What does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, so visibility isn't just, as the current president would maybe say, doing a barbecue every fortnight, which I will note hasn't happened this semester, so that's not good for visibility either. But it's about things like, as an example, I did a self-initiated through the Disabilities Collective free vaccination scheme last semester, which then was sent around by, like in the Gadigal Centre newsletter, for example, and other spaces, because this was a free thing that was really beneficial to a lot of students. And I met a lot of people on the day that hadn't heard of the SRC otherwise, when they realised that this was something that the SRC could do, and that's something that they believed in, and that students should have these free services that along equitable lines really raised our profile. Otherwise, we have a lot of visibility, of course, from the different campaigns and protests we run. In terms of the welcome events that I was talking about, we'd obviously do a bunch at the main campus, but that's only really to the students who end up going to those welcome ceremonies, for example. Our welcome test stalls are always very successful, but they're pretty much drowned out by the hundreds of other clubs and societies or corporate stalls that are at welcome fests. But bringing it back to the new campuses, like, we don't normally have a good presence at the Conservatorium of Music. I think this year we maybe just had one person that was kind of sent there to do a mediocre stall, which I think is not good for visibility or putting forward that the SRC is the student union and representing undergraduate students. And likewise at satellite campuses, particularly the Westmead one, which isn't that far away and should have thousands more students over the coming years. I think that's where I should focus efforts.
Yep, okay. Makes sense. Thank you so much. We have 3 final questions in our ending section. Firstly, are you at liberty to disclose any tickets or factions that you are currently working with?
I think so. I mean, yes, no, you will see it from my presidential nominators anyway, and from any West Diggins and stuff. So we are working with Left Action and the International Student Collective Penta, and those are the main ones at the moment. Also have support as a presidential candidate from some members of the National Labour Students or one of the Labour Left caucuses on campus. And some independents, but we'll get there later.
If you were a frog, what colour would you be?
If I was a frog?
What colour would you be if you were a frog?
Green, of course. Do you want a specific green?
One, maybe it would be your campaign green.
Yeah, I think it would be the Grassroots green.
Nice. Okay, that's pretty much it. Are there any final words you would like to say?
I would just like to say that I am really passionate about the SRC. That's why I've done a lot of work in there in the last 2 years, which is only the amount of time that people spend in there before having enough or moving on to bigger, better things. But because of that, I have the experience that, again, I think is really necessary at this point of time where we are faced with multiple crises in the world and in higher education more generally. So I really do want to genuinely represent students and consult with them, and that's why I'm trying to bring a lot more innovative policies, including other campuses and other parts of campus that are often forgotten, like the Gadigal Centre, for example. And I went to the effort of consulting with First Nation students and conservatorium students, which shouldn't be an effort, actually, I should say. But I think it's something that's often overlooked and not done in the for the purposes of time, or people thinking that they already have all the answers. So I'm coming at it from a good place with experience, but also noting that I have a lot to learn in the SRC and from other people.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for sitting with us, Grace.